again, with our learning goals, that's what we're looking at today. We're starting our new unit. So I'm excited about that because it's a really cool unit, even though some people might not think so. Um, so any questions on what we're doing today? All right. So how we're going to do it. For our do now, we have our practice quiz answer review. So we're going to be going over the answers to the do now, to the quiz for our do now. And again, like I said, kind of explaining why the answers are what they are. And then for learning goal 1, we have 3 things that we're going to be doing. Bounce, study the past. So this is a quick little video. It's only like 5 minutes, and it talks a little bit about how people study the past, some of the tools that they use to study the past, and how people do it. So I'm going to set this here for now. We have a quick reading in our textbook. It's only 2 pages, but it's going to talk about some vocabulary words that we'll need to know. And so that's going to be something you're going to want to get to know that'll help us understand how we know what we know about the past. And then finally, we're going to be doing an activity called Waste Allocator Load and Lift Earth Class. So, what? It is a lot. So we will use that Waste Allocator Load Lift Earth Class to help us understand how we study the past. Okay. So those are the things that we're doing today. Are there any questions on that? All right. So I want to point out a couple of things to our attention with the test here. So the first thing that I want to point out is if you look, we have an average score for our quiz, right? The average score was an 11 out of 24. Okay. If you think about it, that's 50%, that's an F. The average score on this quiz was an F.
What?
Now, remember how I told you don't freak out because the test score is not going to be your assessment score? It's okay that we didn't do so hot on this because honestly, did you have time to study? No. But here's what I want you to understand. Like I said, this is a pretty representative test of Mr. Seymour's tests. So you see for the majority of, for half the class, because our median score was 11 out of 24. So about half of us scored 50% on this quiz or worse when we don't study. So the lesson that you need to take from this, when these quizzes actually start counting and the questions you get correct or incorrect actually affect your grade, remember what happens when you don't study. Okay? Now, were there some people that were able to do extremely well without maybe studying? Yeah, that happens sometimes. But we see if we don't study, we don't pass. Okay? So again, for this quiz, don't freak out over it too much because you weren't given time to study. And that was partially on purpose because I knew this grade wasn't going to be based on how well you did. But I do want you to see what happens if you don't take quizzes seriously. Just out of curiosity, how many people found this quiz to be easier than they thought it would be? Okay. For those of us who felt it was easier than they thought it would be, how many of us were satisfied with our score on it?
I didn't check.
I didn't know.
So some of us don't know what our score was?
No.
Please tell me.
Now, I am not going to go out. I'm not going to be like, hey, everybody, here is so-and-so's score. We're not going to do that. It should have been set so that you can see your score after you got it.
Yeah, I didn't look at
You
it.
didn't look?
Can I look at it right now?
It did. Bless you.
I'm going to look at my score now.
So let me see. Hold on. Let me see.
Hold everybody's score. Ooh.
Okay.
Come on, let's go check.
So, how many people felt this quiz was a little bit harder than they thought it would be? Okay. How many people had heard horror stories about Mr. Seymour's test and Mr. Ruiz's test, so it was about what you expected?
Huh? No. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Horror story.
What? Yeah. Sometimes they kind of are. But again, like I told you the very first day of school, or maybe it was the second day of school. Yes, this class is hard, but you can do it. Okay? But we have to make sure we're taking time to study. We have to make sure if you're stuck, you're asking questions, right? This is not the kind of class that most people can pass if you don't ask for help, if you need help. And it is okay. That is our job as teachers, is to help, right? But you've got to put in the work. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these test answers so we can start working through and seeing how people do. Okay, so the first question. The Chiefs and the Rams will play on Monday, November 19th, 2018. Okay? If we look at this one, remember, in order to be a fact, it has to be something you can look up. Now, if we look here, 90% of us got that right. So I feel like we understood this concept very well, right? Can you look, even though this is a date in the past, can you look up and see if this really happened? Yeah. Yeah, you can go back and see if on Monday, November 19th, 2018, the Chiefs and the Rams played each other. Okay? So this should be a fact. Okay. So this one, I think, if we look here, it says, what is a synonym as BCE? I think, and maybe in part with me trying to make sure everybody knows what a synonym is, that might have led to some of us getting the wrong answer. So let me be clear. A synonym, for those of you that don't know, is a different word that means the same thing. So BCE is not a synonym of BCE. Okay?
What?
It needs to be a different word. And so I'm wondering if maybe that wasn't clear, and that's why a lot of people who got this wrong picked BCE. They're like, oh, a synonym means the same as. Well, BCE is the same word, yes.
I picked BC, BCE, and the other BCE.
Okay.
That's
So,
69.
with that, and you, with quizzes in here, if it's a question that has more than one correct answer, I will tell you how many correct answers there are. So if I don't say anything, there's one correct answer. And so, like I said, it's because BCE is not a synonym of itself. So a synonym, like I said, the word was happy. A synonym would be glad. A synonym would not be happy.
Right there, funny.
And I will let you know on quizzes in here, since I tell you how many answers are correct, if it's more than one. If you don't, or if you don't get all of the answer choices, then it will be wrong. There's no half credit or partial credit. So it's kind of like if you go to McDonald's or Burger King and you order a Coke, chicken nuggets, and fries, and they give you a Coke and chicken nuggets.
But not
Are you
fries.
going to be cool with that?
No.
No.
The fries are one of the best parts.
You're going to go back and get your fries. Right? So it's the same thing here. You need to make sure you have all of the question, all parts of the question answered. Okay? Which date was longer ago? So, for this, the key thing we want to look at, and whenever you try to answer a question, make sure you're understanding what the question is asking you. And so this wants to know what was longer ago, which was the furthest away from today, right? And so we have to pay attention to our labels.
2017 was a few years ago.
So looking at this, just over half of us got this right as 7th grade, just over half, okay? A lot of us that got it incorrect said 1 BCE. Now remember, if there's a B in the label, so BC or BCE, if you see a letter B, then the bigger the number, the longer ago it was. So as you look at your answer choices, do I see a B here? No. Do I see a B here? Yes. Right? B, C, E. There's a letter B. So right now, this is the longest one to go. Do I see a B in this one? No. Do I see a B in this one? Yes. So now I have to ask myself, okay, I have 2 that have a B. What's the bigger number? So what's a bigger number, 2017 or 1? 2017 is a bigger number. So this was longer ago than this. But did you notice how Mr. Seymour went about answering that question? I want to make sure we're all focused on this because this is how you need to think through the questions. A lot of times I think we just we look for an answer and we're like, okay, that seems to make sense, and we pick that answer and we move on. The better way to answer questions is to look at each answer choice and ask yourself, is this answer choice true, false, or I don't know? Right? So those would be the 3 choices.
I like I don't know.
So when you look at this, you're going to say, yeah, this is further ago. No, it wasn't, or I don't know yet. And if you don't know yet, that's fine. Okay? But make sure you're looking at each answer choice and asking yourself if it's correct instead of just skimming through. Okay? Yeah. And I like that. So Milan was thinking about the Ed puzzle and thinking about what she learned
I thought you made a
from
mistake
class.
putting 2000.
That is a great strategy. Okay. Which year was most recent? So, big thing for this one, remember, if there's no label, does that mean that it's before Common Era or Common Era if you don't see a label?
Common Era.
So if there's no letters, does that mean that it was like BC or does that mean that it's AD?
AD.
It means that it's AD, right? Think about our dates today. Remember, we don't write. Remember how the first day of school or second day of school, I wrote down the actual date with the whole Anno Domini 2021?
Mm-hmm.
We don't do that. So if you don't see letters, it means that it is Common Era. Okay? And with Common Era, are bigger numbers closer to today or are bigger numbers longer ago? Closer. Okay? So with Common Era, it's the opposite of before Common Era. So you remember how before Common Era you had a B? The bigger the number was, the longer ago it was? For Common Era, the smaller the number is, the longer ago it was. Okay? So if we look here, about almost 2/3 of us, so more than half and not quite 2/3, got this correct. But if we look at the percent of people who got it wrong, we had a lot of people that picked 3 BC. Basically, 1 out of every 4 of us. And we don't need to point out and figure out who. But out of the 7th graders, a quarter of us said 3 BC was the most recent. Right? And so we really need to remember that anytime you see a B, it's probably going to be longer ago unless there's something else with the B. Okay? So this is the longest ago. My guess on what happened is we didn't read the question carefully, because remember the question before asked about what was longer ago. My guess is people skimmed the question, got confused over recent and longest ago because they didn't read the question well, and they picked the one that was the oldest. That would be my guess, yeah.
Or
I
they
think
find
that some people didn't realize that if it didn't have a label, that it. I think some people thought if it didn't have a label, that it didn't really count.
So some people maybe thought it was kind of like a trick question. It was like, oh, these don't have a label, so these aren't dates. This is the only date that counts. Maybe that might be what some people were thinking.
I don't know what they were thinking, but they were obviously wrong.
We need to get you like a balance ball.
Well, they made it 69.
Make you nervous.
What's that 59? Come on, bro. 72.
All right.
I did
Which
that.
pairings are correct? Can I be honest with you all? All right. Thanks. Even though I'm the one who wrote the questions for this test, looking back on this, I don't love this question because I think it can be kind of confusing. So correct answer would have been this one, the BC and BCE, the AD and CE. But if you picked this, I think that could be a correct answer too, right? Because I wasn't as clear with this as I should have been. So which pairings are correct? And if we look at each question or each answer and ask if it's true, false, or I don't know, well, we can look at this and see. So BC and BCE, do those two things go together? Yeah, I mean, because they mean the same thing. They're synonyms. That could be considered a pairing, right? AD and BC, do these two things go together?
No.
Well, remember when we look at our timelines, when we look at our timelines, like we've talked about, if it says BC over here, what is it always going to say over here?
AD. Oh.
Right? Or if we... right?
What?
So if we're looking at a timeline and it goes across, from BC to AD, or if it goes from BCE to CE, I can definitely see how you would have said, well, yeah, this is correct. Because these two are pairs because they're synonyms, and these two are pairs because they're on the timeline together. Right? So if you picked this one, don't feel too badly. Because like I said, I think I could have written this question a little bit better to be clear for what I was looking for. Because this kind of is a correct answer. Right? And if this were a test that like you were getting points on based on if you got it correct or incorrect, truthfully, I probably would have given people points for this. Okay. BC and BCE, do these two things go together? Yeah, because they mean the same thing, right? AD and CE, do these two things go together? Yes, because they're synonyms. So that's why I was saying this is the correct answer. But I can definitely see if you pick this, that could be a correct answer too. Are they doing the lawn today? Nice. It always gets, huh? Yeah. Oh, they're doing the roof. Maybe they're doing the HVAC unit. All right. BC and CE, do these two things go together? Before Christ and Common Era, do those two pairings ever go together? No, they don't mean the same thing. They're not synonyms. And if we look at our timeline, if it says BC, it's never going to say CE on the other side. So these two things don't go together. BCE and AD, are they synonyms? Yes or no? No. And are they ever going to be on the same timeline together? No. Okay. So this one would not be correct. This one should have been the correct answer, but if you pick this one, there's a good argument that that's a correct answer too. Okay. I really appreciate our patience. I want to make sure that we're not losing focus because, like I said, I know that just going through test questions kind of stinks a little bit, doesn't it? I realize that. But I also want to make sure that we're able to be successful and know how to get correct answers, even if we aren't 100% prepared. Okay? So we will do a couple more just to make sure we kind of understand the process, and then we will move on. Okay? So continue to stay focused for me, please. We've been doing a really, really good job. I want to make sure we continue to do a really, really good job. Okay, so this one, even though about 2/3 of us got this correct, so basically, if you think about it, 1 out of every 3 seventh graders missed this question on average. Okay, how many years have passed from 2236 BCE to 1719 CE? Okay, so remember, we have to look at the labels. If these labels are opposite, what do we have to do? Add, right? So just to let you know, this is what you get if you subtracted it. So if you pick this answer here, you either didn't check the labels or forgot that if they are the opposite, you add. If we add these two things together, this is what we get. Okay. Any questions on that one?
Okay, you got that first.
Okay, so we're going to talk about a couple of comprehension questions super quick, and then we will move on.
I got all those.
So this, we'll do the second one. How many years did Transylvania fight in the war after 1624? So this comprehension question, you have to put a lot of stuff together, right? So we have to look at the timeline. We have to be able to read the timeline and know how many years each little line is. So on this timeline, how much time passes between each line? What is that? Is it like 6 months, 3 months, a year, 10 years, 500 years?
A year.
Each line, like, so how much time is this?
A year.
Yeah.
Well, we can't really see the lines on the board right now.
Oh, okay. So it's hard to see the lines on the board?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're looking on your computer, you might be able to tell, or we might just remember, right? So even if we can't see them up there, I'm not going to draw them in or anything like that. So let's back up a step. So these big bold lines, can you see the bold ones? Okay. So how many years are there from the bold ones? Yeah. 5 years. Each bold line is 5 years. Okay. So if this is 5 years, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines here, how many years there is each one of these lines? 1 year. Okay. So you have to know that. You have to know where to find Transylvania. So it asks, how many years do they fight after 1624? So in our timeline, we have to find the year 1624. And we have to find Transylvania. Okay. So now, since it said after 1624, I'm counting all of the red lines that start after here. There's 1 year, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it should be 5 years the Transylvania split by. So does it make sense to figure out how we got those questions?
Yes.
Awesome.
I was correct. I put years at the end. Look.
Give me just a moment. So this is the last one we're going to do. My friend just told me that the Egyptian civilization started in 4000 BC and ended in 500 CE. They also said that the Egyptian civilization lasted 3,500 years. I told my friend that they made 2 mistakes. What were the mistakes that my friend made? So what is this question? What is Mr. Seymour asking you to do in this question?
I didn't read it correctly.
Find the mistakes that your friend made. Okay?
Wait,
How many mistakes did the friend make?
2.
2 mistakes. Now notice, remember earlier how I told you if there's more than one correct answer, I'll tell you how many correct answers there are?
Yeah.
So there are 3 correct answers. You can only pick 3 answers. Right? So the friend made 2 mistakes, but there are 3 ways to fix the mistakes that they made. So again, look at each question. They should have said Egyptian culture instead of Egyptian civilization. Is that true? Is that false? Or do we know that? So think back to when you actually first took it and you read that. Were you like, yeah, that's not right? Or were you like, yeah, that's true. They should have said that. Or you're like, I don't even know what this means. So how many of us, when we first took the test, read this one and said, that's not right? Okay. How many of us, when we first took this test, read this and said, yeah, that's a true answer, that's correct? How many people, when you read this, were like, I don't know if that's a correct answer or not yet?
Yeah. I first thought that.
So, let me pause for a second. I didn't have everybody share an answer. Whatever your answer was, it's fine. But if we're going to know how to answer questions correctly, we have to know how to think about the question so we aren't just guessing. So everyone should have an answer to this. Either you thought this was right, you thought this was wrong, or you didn't know. So everyone needs to give a response. Whatever your response was is totally fine. So when you took this test yesterday, how many people thought this was correct? Okay.
Oh.
When you took this test yesterday, how many people thought this was incorrect? Okay.
Oh, wait.
When you took this test yesterday, how many people didn't know if it was correct or incorrect? You didn't know. Okay. So if you don't know, you kind of skip it because you know that there are 3 correct answers. Right? So we'll skip it, look at our other answer choices, and see if there are 3 correct ones. So the second one says they could have said before Common Era instead of before Christ. Is that correct? Are before Common Era and before Christ synonyms? Do they mean the same thing? BC and BCE mean the same thing. So yes, they could have said before Common Era instead of before Christ. Because they said BC here and CE here. And those 2 things never go together. Remember, if you say BC, you don't say Common Era. If you say before Common Era, you don't say AD. So yes, this would be a correct answer. So if you know it's correct, you should go ahead and click it. The next one says they should have said Egypt lasted for 4,500 years, not 3,500.
I put that one.
Is that correct, incorrect, or I don't know?
Correct.
Yeah, no.
Correct.
Correct. Because remember, we have different labels here. And if the labels are opposite, you have to add them. What did our friends do if they said that it was 3,500 years? What mistake did our friends do? They subtracted, right? So they forgot
Before Christ era. That's BCE.
that they needed to add if it's opposite. So this one should definitely be correct. So the next answer choice, they could have said before Christ era, since they said Common Era. Is that correct, incorrect, or we don't know? Yeah.
Incorrect. Christ era is not a thing.
Yeah. Before Christ era is not a thing. That's
Amen.
not correct.
Right.
Before Common Era is correct. Before Christ is correct. Before Christ era is not a thing. Okay? So that one is no. We skip it. And then if we look at our last answer choice, they could have said Anno Domini instead of Common Era.
Yep.
Is that correct, incorrect, or don't know? Yeah. Yep.
Correct.
Correct. Right? Because again, since they said BC here, the thing that would have made sense here would have been Common Era. Okay. So our three answers should be 2, 3, and 5. Okay. So you remember how we skipped number 1 because it was an I don't know? So now we can go back. Is this going to be a correct answer or not? Is number 1 going to be a correct answer or not?
No.
No. Why not?
Because we already have three.
We already have our 3 correct answers. And we know those 3 answers are correct because we double checked our work and our data. All right. Are there any questions on the quiz? Cool. Again, thank you so much for focusing in so well. We are going to watch a quick little video here. It is only about 90 seconds long, and it talks about how people study the past.
How do people study the past if they weren't there? Through stories. He frozen. He being frozen. I don't talk. Let's go. I don't talk that day. I don't talk. What is he saying?
We're not going to watch this video. All right.
Make the volume go up. Make your computer volume go up. Check if the video's on mute. I think the video goes on mute.
Okay, so we're not going to spend any more time on this. We will just go ahead and move on to the next video. So, what I need for you to do, one person at your table group, please go ahead and get books from the shelf for the people at your table group. We are going to turn to page 7. This will go super quick.
Wait, what page do you turn?
So
Who's on your desk?
Exactly.
7 looks like this. Page 7 looks like this. Everybody go ahead and make sure you're on page 7.
Okay, 782 pages. This book is one of the longest books I've ever seen. The longest book I have ever seen.
Page 7. Oh, wait, that's page 3.
Page 3.
Page 7.
Is that even Roman numeral? Mode 3? You only 5? Page 1?
No, we're just regular page 7, not Roman numeral 7. So you're right. Roman numeral 7 would be we're just on Arabic numeral 7. Okay. So, like I said, we are only going to be reading page 7, page 8, and the first part of page 9. We're going to stop where it says, "Where did human ancestors live?" Okay. Now, with our book, I know you used a similar book last year with Mr. Burke. It's the same company, so the book is laid out the same. So I'm just going to take a couple of seconds to point out a couple of things. So you see how it says guiding question. When we really start getting into our work and we're using the book, the guiding questions, one of those will usually be our key question that you're trying to answer. So make sure you're paying attention to the guiding question. Okay? That's going to be super important. Second thing, the vocabulary words are going to be super important. Something that's kind of nice about the online book is that you can click on the vocabulary words in the reading, and it will pop up right away so you can see what the words are. Today, we really want to focus on the word anthropology, archaeologist, fossil, and artifact. So the 4 words, like I said, that you're really going to want to pay attention to are anthropology, archaeologist, fossil, and artifact. Any questions on that? Okay. So, hopefully we'll see. Nope, doesn't look like it's going to read aloud. Let me see if it's Savas or if it's the computer.
Just upper the volume. Again, then after? Why is everybody copying his language? He's back.
Needs for academic lab, we then go.
I told you to rate the computer volume. Because he thinks he's smarter than kids. That's what, boy. I'm a gamer.
What are fossils?
All right, cool. So we might be able to
Watch the other two.
All right, so we're going to do a read along today. So all I'm going to ask you to do is, as it's playing over the speaker, read along with it, so that way we get done a little bit quicker. Okay? But your responsibility is to make sure that you are reading along, not zoning out. Here we go.
Yeah.
Studying early humans. Until about 5,000 years ago, people had no way to write things down.
Wait, where is that? I don't think that. Until 5,000. What? I know what artifacts are. I play games, and every game has an artifact.
You've probably seen lots of movies about prehistoric people. Most of them pretty silly and not very accurate, even though fun to watch. What's the real story about how early humans lived? Well, forget about houses or towns. Probably you'd be living in a small group, maybe a couple of related families who were constantly moving from place to place. Sometimes you'd move because the weather changed or the hunting was bad. Often you'd go back to a place where you knew certain plants grew or there was a warm cave. What was everyday life like? You mainly wanted to find food and water and a safe, warm shelter for a while. You worried about attacks by wild animals or another band of travelers. If you were a man, you mostly hunted animals for food, so it was important to keep track of where certain animals were. If you were a woman, you gathered fruits, nuts, seeds, wild honey, and anything else edible you could find. Women and younger children also hunted smaller animals or caught fish. Because of this way of life, we know the people of this time as hunter-gatherers. To survive and succeed in this way of living, hunter-gatherers developed several important new skills as time went on. One basic skill was how to fashion tools from stone. Their early tools were rough and clumsy, but they gradually improved their skill at toolmaking by sharpening flakes of stone into blades or arrow points. Sometimes they used hard animal parts like bones and antlers as tools. Better weapons let hunters go after bigger game, like deer or even mammoths. Because working stone was such a big step, this period is known as the Paleolithic Era, which means Old Stone Age. While making stone tools was important for survival, another new ability was perhaps even more important. Can you think of what that was?
No.
Right, fire. Using fire gave early humans new powers. They could keep them warm, offer light, and scare off dangerous animals. It allowed early humans to cook their food, especially meat and fish. Cooking made many new foods okay to eat. Most importantly, fire allowed early peoples to move to new places where they otherwise might not have been able to survive, opening up more of the world to human habitation. How do you think hunter-gatherers learned the skill of making and using fire?
Right. Friction.
Okay, so I will go ahead and read this first part, the
Probably use
distant
the lighter.
past. So this is the part that is the very first part of your book, where it says we are all interested. We are all interested in people, but certain people called anthropologists have made a science out of studying people. Anthropology is the study of how human beings behave, how they act together, where they came from, and what makes one group of people different from another. Remember, anthropology was one of the words we need to know. It's the study of people and how they act together. In this lesson, we will look at the work of a particular group of anthropologists known as archaeologists. Archaeologists study human life in the past by examining the things that people left behind. So we're going to learn a little bit more about anthropologists and archaeologists and how they work.
Studying early humans. Until about 5,000 years ago, people had no way to write things down. To study prehistory, or the time before written records, archaeologists look for the places where people may have lived. What are fossils? To learn about the earliest humans, archaeologists depend mainly on fossils. Fossils are hardened remains or imprints of living things that existed long ago. These remains may include plants, feathers, bones, and even footprints. Fossils form in several ways. For example, after a living thing dies, it may quickly become covered by sand or mud. Once